Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, where everything you're about to hear and see has been done in one take. I'm your host, the One Take Man. In last week's video, I gave a brief overview, retrospective, whatever I decided to call that video, on Special Unit 2, a short-lived but still somewhat interesting series, at least in concept, which unfortunately was was ultimately incapable of really fulfilling its potential, as even though it was very contemporary in its in its stylings, a lot of its uh, narrative and plotting appeal nevertheless stems a lot more from the from the 70s and more traditional cop shows, which were already kind of starting to get phased out at the time in the favor of in the favor of stuff that was more investigation driven. If I am to be, if I am to say so myself. That is just one of that's really just one of the issues that I had. I'm not going to go into into all that again. If you want to if you want to get more into all of that, you can see the previous issue for your previous video for yourself. Right now I'm going to do something a little bit different, namely, as you can see for yourself, an episode ranking. I'm going to go through every Special Unit 2 episode and rank them from worst to best. That is arguably a little bit less daunting than it sounds, because even though it's an entire series, it's only 19 episodes. But still, saying a little something about 19 episodes is going to be pretty tricky. So I'll try to keep myself as contained as I can. And by the way, each and every episode will be showcased with one of these images. All of these images are from IMDb, in case you're curious. And yes, this was the show logo. I think that this very much this very much speaks for how of its time and otherwise not described this show. This show was on average. Still, there were some high points. There were some low points, and I want to go. And now I want to go with you through all of them. Starting out at number 19, we have season 2, episode 11, "The Love." It's the third to last or anti-penultimate episode. Yeah, one of these had to be the worst, and unfortunately, it's this one. The idea behind this is arguably one of the most propaganda-driven driven plots there are, because the idea is that because the main conflict of the episode stems from the fact that a judge who is known for harsh sentencing is doused with something that makes him that makes him dismiss people without facing any repercussions. And it's and especially Unit 2's job to to find a link that doused him, incidentally this bald guy in the back, and and make him reverse the dousing, so he can once again become that that harsh judge. So yeah, it very heavily leans into the propaganda aspects of this episode of this series that I've kind of rallied against, and and also the actual also the actual uh, uh, link itself, or the guest character that people will be would be would most recurringly be following, is fairly unpleasant. And there is a way to make an unpleasant character unpleasant to the unpleasant to the characters, but funny to the audience. And unfortunately, this show, this episode didn't really, didn't strike that balance. It arguably never even tried. So for that reason, The Love makes it at number 19. At number 18, just a little better, we got season 2, episode 7, The Drag. On IMDb, where as I previously said, I got all these images from. This episode is actually, is actually rated quite highly, possibly because the IMDb, audience appreciates the comedy, and that comedy it really unfolds from two places. First of all, the fact that the episode revolves around rescuing a princess from a dragon, only instead of it being in a medieval European setting, it's in a it's a modern story involving American natives. And second of all, the hero, quote unquote, is the character who is most notoriously a coward among the main cast. And I realize that is supposed to make the the situation a little bit more amusing, but I don't necessarily find that the humor of this show always works, unless it is really human and character driven. But when it comes to trying to flip concepts like this in the favor of humor, I find that it typically fails. Not to mention, it represents another another sizable departure from the initial premise of the show, and overall I find the pacing and plotting of this episode to just not really work. So it's not it's not inherently bad. There is at least some some stuff going on, some some action that moves the plot forward, unlike the previous episode. So for that reason, The Drag is marginally better. At number 17, season 1, episode 3, The Raps. And in case you're wondering why I'm using the show logo again, well, it's because as I said, all of these pictures are from IMDb, and for some reason, this episode doesn't have any photos on IMDb. And this episode is here because it marks another point of contention I typically have with this series, namely the fact that it views its non-human characters as not as characters but as obstacles to overcome, and that very much and this episode is very much the first point where that really shines through, because the villain of this piece is very clearly not designed as a character but as an obstacle. That character is supposed to be a Japanese mummy, but the overall design is still very much Egyptian. The one thing that delineates him as Japanese is his martial arts expertise. That and aside from that, there is also the fact that he kind of borrows some abilities from the mummy from the Brendan Fraser movie that came out like 2 years earlier. So yeah, it's very derivative, and it very much and pretty much everything about this is really only there in order to present a challenge with not a lot of deeper effort or thought really going into the any peculiarities or distinctive aspects that make this character stand out. Also, there isn't really a lot done with the there isn't really a lot that the what the leads do in this episode to really make it distinctive, and hell, even falling into some falling a little bit backwards and making the female lead a damsel in distress, which not a great look. let's just say that when let's just say that when a show that came out around 10 years ago does handles gender better than you, you're in that showed up 10 years earlier, does gender better than you, you're in a little bit of trouble. That show is the X-Files, but still. If you're really trying to copy the landmarks and if you're really trying to copy the landmarks and make yourself noteworthy that way, at least copy the good parts about the landmarks. But you didn't. So for that reason, the Raps makes it at number 17. At number 16, season 2, episode 3, The Years. We've gone from the from the bad to the bland, to the forgettable. The basic idea behind this episode is that the villain of the piece has a way of making has a way of stealing characters' lives and youths away. And this lady in the picture here is the prime suspect for who that for who the villain could be. Unfortunately, that I do have to say, however, that aspect is somewhat underhandled. The investigation itself is muddled due to the marketing and the turbulent history of this character, and ultimately it doesn't really do a lot to really connect, to really to really make me invested into what these characters are going through. I don't even recall what the what the twist was, or if it was a simple twist or a double twist, as in whether the twist was that the perpetrator actually is simply someone that looks like that, or if the perpetrator is actually that person, but he was the scapegoat. So yeah, this episode is the most forgettable of the series, and for that reason, it's at number 16. At number 15, we've got The Waste. Points for originality, I guess, from season 1, episode 5. Though as I've mentioned in my retrospective, this episode marks the first big departure from the show's premise, in that the in that the main villain, rather than being a creature from folklore, is actually something that emerged somewhat spontaneously. That being said, it does still have a somewhat interesting presentation to it, something that makes it and it has plenty of things that make it distinctive. Also, this episode has one of the things that I personally enjoyed about Special Unit 2, namely conflict within the police force, as Nick's former partner from before his Special Unit 2 days ends up interfering quite extensively within the investigation. Still, he is made out to be an intriguing and sympathetic character. So his involvement within this episode very much saves it. Even though I would otherwise not be as perhaps not be as forgiving towards it. Still, at 15 we have The Waste. At number 14, season 1, episode 6, The Deaths. Yeah, I have to say I was somewhat surprised that consecutive episodes showed up at this position. But yeah, I kind of have to say they do fit. Really, the part that stands out the most about this episode is, at least in terms of television history, is that it marks Tom Welling's debut appearance. So before he was in Smallville, he was in this episode in particular. He was in fact, I think he's killed off in the prologue of the episode. Funny story. The basic idea behind this is that there are mer people who attack women, and this weird still has actually some connection to actually has some connection to these attacks. I won't get into that because I don't really want to spoil anything about that. Still, the actual pacing, the actual mystery, and the actual terror that the actual threat, I should say, that these villains present is showcased in an interesting manner. And this episode also gets props for its secondary plot, which showcases Kate as a caring older sister. And I have to say, I found that incursion into her past overall quite interesting. And in fact, when looking at the two leads, I think it's safe to say that while Nick is more interesting conceptually, Kate actually has most of the uh, is actually fleshed out most effectively, and stands out therefore as having more interesting character work to her. And this episode very much contributes to that. So there are plenty of good things about this episode, but plenty of others that aren't as interesting to behold. So for that reason, it makes it to number 14. At number 13, moving out of the bottom third, we have season 2, episode 1, The Grain. Okay, somehow 3 consecutive episodes made it to 3 consecutive spots. I have no idea how that happened. The villain in this case, in this episode, is the Sandman. However, unlike the mythical creature who brings sleep or dreams, this Sandman makes people live out their repressed, darkest fantasies, and that is an interesting premise, and it does actually and it is actually explored in some interesting ways. However, most of the good parts of this episode really come from the first half, because in the second half it comes over Kate, and it goes on to live out her dark side, or her more more accurately, her more hedonistic side. And in that sense, her hedonistic side is quite boring. She just wants to indulge in desserts, indulge in the power she has, be that through the virtue of her position as a cop, or simply her her expertise in other fields. She wants to indulge in sex. So very much it very much wastes a decent opportunity for characterization. And I have to say, I find myself disappointed by it on that basis. But otherwise, the investigation around finding out who the Sandman is, and how to most effectively contain him is quite interesting to behold. But unfortunately, there is still the bulk of this episode holding it back. So for that reason, it makes it to number 13. At number 12, we have season 2, episode 9, The Wall. I do have to say, the designs on this on the monster of this episode looks very effective, as you can see. It does have that very nightmarish quality from a visual perspective. But then when you consider, and however, then comes the fact that it lives within the walls of a high school, and that and in many ways that gives it a deeper, more visceral type of fear. It very actively engages in both your fear of the unknown and the fear of the uncanny, in in a very interesting manner. Where the episode fails is in how it really engages with this premise, because the main idea because the main story behind it is that Kate is visiting her high school reunion. And yeah, this thing was in the walls of Kate's high school, and she was disbelieved for saying that there is something going on within the, within the walls of the school. Disbelieved and even mocked. And then when it turns out, oh, that was actually true. Well, okay, the she was vindicated in the end. I'll say that much. Also, sorry for the spoiler. Um, but the road up until then, it very much went against the, very much went against the, the established story, or the established potential that this story could have had. Add to that the side plot of uh, of the Special Unit 2 chief having to spend some time with Carl in in some level of forced proximity. And I have to say this this episode was, while from a threat and from a threat management potential, quite interesting. Its actual realization uh, wasn't really as effective as it could have been, though it does add some interesting aspects to characterization. So for that reason, The Wall makes it to number 12. At number 11, season 2, episode 5, The Eve. Okay, this episode, I kind of have to say, suffers from being overhyped, because the villain of this episode has actually been set up some episodes prior, um, and I have to say that episode was is pending, so it's fair to say it's better than this. And the villain is supposed to have a great deal of power and cunning, but that is not really something that has been that is not really something that is very effectively portrayed over the course of this episode. It's his cunning is very effectively presented in how exactly he manages to use his abilities to control his minions, and how he uses them, also how he uses them strategically in order to gain leverage over the lead cast. But beyond that, I find myself not to find him as compelling as he could have been. Even though he's played by John Delancey in one of his more sensual performances, I think it's fair to say. Yeah. And I have to say, John Delancey very much carries that role and makes this character that much more noteworthy. But otherwise, he represents a failure in potential. There is more that could have been done with this character, but he has been handled in an effective but somewhat unceremonious manner. I very much hope that he would have returned, if there were a third season, but that's beside the point now. My current point is that The Eve makes it to number 11. At number 10, halfway along this list, we have The Brothers, season 1, episode 1. Yeah, the very premiere of this series. And I have to say that as a premiere, it does a great job at establishing these characters, establishing their banter, establishing their connections and relationships moving forward, and also giving some and also serving as a good introduction into what this world is and what exactly the mechanics and expectations behind it are. So in terms of what makes it a good pilot for a series, it is quite effective. The threat is handled it is decent. It's not, it's not really spectacular, but it doesn't really have to be spectacular for the sake of this episode. It just has to be. And for the most part, it does, it does effectively serve its purpose, presenting itself as presenting itself as something to be, something to be overcome, and to present an interesting complication or twist in the, in the typical, in a typical kind of police show. And also, I do have to appreciate the resolution, where where Kate, the newest edition, is actually the one to save Nick, even though most of the episodes do it the other way around. Whenever one of them is whenever one of them is threatened, it is much more likely for for Kate to be the one who is threatened than for Nick to be the one who has to rescue her. So yeah, not great in terms of gender dynamics, but whatever. That is a problem with the rest of the show in general, not with this episode, which which does actually do some pretty interesting stuff. So for that reason, it makes it to the middle of this list at number 10. At number 9, we have Season 2, Episode 6, The Rocks. This episode actually focuses on Gorgons, and it is actually another one of the exceptions I mentioned, where it is actually Nick who is the one that has to be saved. And it does offer up a pretty interesting opportunity for body horror, given that it is about people being turned into statues. However, it is an opportunity that I find to be underutilized, as Nick isn't really that compliant of a victim, so to speak. Though that is very understandable given his background and some of his defining features, and I really won't hold it against him. But I will say that the Gorgons themselves are are interesting figures to follow, and and the actual scramble and the evolution of the stakes over the course of this episode is interesting to behold. So for that reason, The Rocks makes it at number 9. At number 8, we have Season 2, Episode 8, The Beast. This episode starts out as one thing, but then very effectively turns into another thing. It's about initially it seems to be about a villain who murders sex workers for for a variety of reasons, and seems to also involve another one of the another conflict, so to speak, between Special Unit 2 and regular PD, which, as I mentioned, I typically enjoy. However, this episode goes a little bit deeper into that and actually showcases the villain himself being a little bit more of a tragic figure, someone who is aware of the situation they're in and how it troubles and how it troubles him and his position within society, and he is looking for a way to overcome it. Unfortunately, there is a more savage aspect to him that he has to that he has to combat, and that really brings him, and that on the one hand makes him somewhat sympathetic, and on the other hand still makes him a threat. It's the kind of complexity I typically that I very much found to be missing from most of this. That was my phone. I should have put it on mute. Anyway, going back, this is the kind of complexity that I very much missed throughout most of the episodes on this show, and However, the rest of the episode is still, is still quite standard. So while it has an interesting point to it, it isn't really enough to elevate it beyond some, beyond some other episodes uh, that this show had. So for that reason, The Beast makes it to number 8. At number 7, season 2, episode 13, The Wish. So yeah, this one I have to say, quite. So you might have noticed this is actually the series finale, so which is ranked higher than the series premiere. So overall, one could say that the series did showcase some level of progression. The basic idea behind this episode is that behind the villain of this episode is that it, or to be more precise, she, is a jinn, and if it fulfills a certain number of wishes, a number it is very much approached to, it will no longer be bound by the necessity to fulfill wishes in order to utilize its abilities, and it is very much and uh, and therefore that facet of its never have to say that that facet of its nature, or of its current state, adds a little bit of tension, a little bit of a ticking clock to the actual story of this episode, making for a more intriguing action piece. Couple that with the fact that she can change her body into becoming tangible and intangible at a whim, and that creates some very interesting choreography and conflict dynamics over the course of this episode, making for an intriguing cat and mouse game all throughout. Of particular note here is the actual climax of the episode, where she and Nick face off within within a actually face off. I'm not gonna say where, because that would kind of spoil the episode, and uh, and the show very effectively pits his tactical know-how against her abilities, leading to some very creative combat choreography, all things considered. Beyond that, however, I can't really say that the show does a lot with in terms of its characterization, or in terms of really fleshing out its cast beyond what has already been established. So for that reason, while it is an eye-catching episode to watch, it only barely breaks. Only barely scrapes against the top third of this list. Still, it's a good placement. So The Wish at number 7. At wait just a minute. I need to mute my phone because now it's getting. Okay. Now back to the list. At number 6, season 1, episode 4, The Web. Yeah, going back to season 1, and one of the most surprisingly efficient episodes of the maybe not efficient but effective episodes of the entire series. And this one features the villains of this episode are quite literally Black Widows, or spider humanoid hybrids who who present themselves as women, but more typically typically feed on men. which I have to say is and I have to say I found that idea to be quite interesting, and the presentation behind how it is that they've been, and then the presentation of them and of the thread they present over the course of the episode is done very effectively, and it very clearly, very cleanly highlights highlights the threat that they pose and how exactly they can menace the not just average not just average civilians or the average person within the setting, but also how they can directly counter the leads as well. It's an So yeah, that makes for a very interesting that in turn makes the makes the overall story very interesting and very gripping to actually follow up on. Combine that with some of the ways in which it plays around with the dynamics between the cast, and also how it delves a little bit into into some relationship drama that would be an on again off again feature of the series as a whole, and it really serves as a very captivating, very intriguing episode that very much lures you into grabs you in the web, haha, of the series as a whole, and how effectively it can engage with its premise. So for that reason, the web makes it to number 6. At number 5, season 2, episode 10, The Straw. This episode, in case you haven't figured out, sees a scarecrow functioning as a villain, or however, in this case, the scarecrow, rather than being something that scares crows, is in fact the creature that inspired people to build straw figures in order to scare the crows. The actual, whereas its actual targets are people. It literally feeds off their fear, and the idea, and that very much feeds into the concept of the very much feeds into the concept of the episode, as the scarecrow does, as the scarecrow eventually attacks a variety of people in order to draw out their fears, constantly increasing the menace that it presents. And when it comes to that, the threat levels that are presented throughout this episode are very interestingly showcased, and the escalation is very well executed. The side story, or more precisely the narrative of the leads, sees Nick go through anger management, even though for all intents and purposes he should have actually been in prison for all the antics he pulled off. But I digress. And it is through that, and through his time in anger management, that he actually, that he is actually capable of teaching people how to go through their fear, how to ultimately face their fear, and be able to overcome the grip that the scarecrow has on them, and even the grip the scarecrow could potentially have on on him specifically. So this episode is somewhat underrated, I think. When looking at the fan base that this show actually has, but however, for the reasons I've specified, I think it does a great job at combining the thread of this episode with the with the overall development of this of the lead cast, and thereby ensuring that they become better people by learning how to overcome the threat presented, which is something that this show does arguably quite rarely, even though it is basically a ready-made premise for for a lot of intriguing intriguing stories. Freaking Power Rangers does that. Anyway, still, this is a good underrated episode, and it makes it to number 5. At number 4, season 1, episode 2, The Pack. I have to say, this is another episode that I was kind of surprised in hindsight was actually as good as it was. I was actually thinking of including this into the top 3, but the top 3 are simply, are simply a little bit better than it. So it didn't make it. So for that reason, it didn't make it into the top 3. But it is still a very interesting story. While I mentioned that that Special Unit 2 never did vampires, and in fact it very openly scoffs at including vampires right within its first episode, that didn't stop them from doing werewolves right in their second, even though arguably werewolves are or at the time were also bordering on being overused. And still, it does manage to do some very effective things in terms of how it manages to develop its villains, because the actual pack of werewolves doesn't just consist of people with isn't just threatening from on a physical level, but they actually hold powers of position and influence over society, and a lot of their ferocity in their beastly mode is very much mirrored by their ferocity or ruthlessness when they're in the appearance of regular people. And the ways in which the show plays around with that or the ways in which the episode plays around with that is has been quite interesting to behold. And then comes the fact that Nick, as you can see in this picture right here, ends up being turned into into one of the pack, and he gets to explain how exactly that temptation, how exactly that that drive to hunt and to utilize utilize his newfound power really ends up getting to him. That is a very haunting but very effective horror presentation that in many ways I think set the benchmark for future developments over the course of this series. So yeah, in that sense, I find it to be a very compelling and also very thrilling presentation of the kinds of threats that this that this show delves into, and it is for that reason that I think the pack deserves to be at number 4. At number 3, the bronze medal goes to The Piper, season 2, episode 12. The the basic idea behind this episode actually sees this character, who is reminiscent of the Pied Piper from the fairy tale, actually being the mascot / host of a children's show, and using his audience in order to do his bidding and pull off stuff like complex bank heists and such. And this is one of the show and I think this is the episode that most effectively utilizes the comedic potential that this series has. Given how it parodies Barney, and also when I look at the over the course of the investigation and in the backstage of children's programming, and how it is sometimes revealed that that for the people backstage, they don't really feel compelled to constantly be to be the role model. They are just there for the paycheck, and can very much be assholes, outside of their jobs, assholes, profiteers, whatever. So yeah, this is a very this arguably counts as a very ready-made premise, especially for this generation of creators that will have grown up in stuff like the 70s, the 80s, or even early 90s when mascot-driven live-action kids shows um, would have been most compelling and most exciting to follow. Or would have been at their height, and this being a parody. I couldn't help but be reminded of Smile Time when I when I rewatched this episode. The Angel the series episode, which also focuses on a supernatural creature using using a children's show in order to control or gain some kind of favor from a child audience, and those villains also use music in order to pull off their endeavor. And yeah, it's somewhat interesting the kind of parallels that can result from that. But really, the main humor from I heard a lot, and also another aspect that really fueled the humor of the show was how effectively the villain of the piece is actually disguising himself, and in a sense of fully embodying the mascot that he plays. And I have to say that is oftentimes played for laughs, but it is, and I found it to be quite quite effective, all things considered. Not to mention the episode itself ends on a very interesting cliffhanger that I would have loved to see explored further if the show got a third season, but that's not the case. Still, it's an enjoyable episode for what it is, and I find it to be a quite compelling viewing experience, and one that also one that also effectively weaves comedy into its premise. So for that reason, The Piper makes it to number 3. At number 2, season 2, episode 2, The Skin. Yeah, going into the completely opposite direction from the from the most comedic episode to arguably the most dramatic episode. The basic idea behind this one is that a shape changer ends up causing some havoc within Chicago, and that shape changer is very much has the MO of another such creature that Nick himself is very familiar with, because because another Link from the same species murdered his previous partner, who was coincidentally was also his lover. And however, that Link has since been caught, but now they need his assistance in order to in order to catch this newest Link. And I have to say, the way Michael Landis is able to play the fury that Nick is wrestling against when it comes to how he has to deal with his partner's killer is very compelling, and the episode very effectively manages to utilize that tension, primarily also through the fact that this episode is called The Skin because these links, as I've already mentioned, are shape changers, and as such, they can take on other appearances, adding a little bit of tension with every new, with every potential encounter as to whether you're whether you're interacting with a genuine article or or the actual villain of the piece, which and I have to say that that tension is I have to say that in that sense that plot tension is played around with very effectively, and also this episode does a great job at showcasing showcasing Nick and how he how he handles his and how he handles himself under this new and unusual pressure that he faces. It is it is a very compelling episode, and I have no problem calling it actually calling it my favorite, but it is still not the best episode. That honor instead goes to, at number 1, Season 2, Episode 4, The Invisible. The only problem with this episode is the title, The Invisible. It kind of sounds a little bit too clinical. Personally, I would have gone with something like The Unseen or The Wraith, or if you want to keep with the mystery going, or if you want to point more towards the plot, you can go with The Hunter. Any of these titles would have been more fitting than The Invisible, but here we go. Still, when it comes to the rest of the when it comes to other aspects of this episode, it is very effective. This episode follows the boogeyman, because with any kind of paranormal when it comes to any kind of paranormal show or any show touching upon the paranormal, the likelihood of it eventually touching upon the boogeyman becomes a certainty. And in Special Unit, and when it comes to Special Unit 2, the boogeyman is something of a migratory hunter, someone who only children can see, and who thrives on on going down certain hunting paths, and finding various victims to kill. And in the case of this particular boogeyman, he was actually the perpetrator of a murder that went of a murder for which an innocent man was actually blamed, and the son of said innocent man, who actually saw the boogeyman do it, comes back into the fold when it with this episode, in order to help Special Unit 2 deal with this menace. So yeah, this episode in many ways covers a lot of the issues that I typically have with the series, in that it manages to deliver present an interesting villain with his own internal world, and who manages to present a threat not just through his natural attributes, but also through his own personal autonomy, and how exactly that moves him against the heroes. That also does a pretty good job at showcasing the. This episode also does a pretty good job at showcasing the humanity of its leads, given that they have to. Given that they have to save a man from what is basically from death row, and also it highlights a little bit the in-universe impact that this status quo and the secrecy actually has, and it manages to utilize the the full breadth of its premise in order to deliver an intriguing and eye-catching story that is filled with plenty of twists and turns, and it manages to stay compelling throughout. So for that reason, The Invisible is the episode that I dub the best Special Unit 2 episode. And yeah, as such, this episode has come to an end. So thank you for your attention. If you've enjoyed my run through these episodes, well then please like the video, maybe even share it wherever you think other people will also like the video. If you have anything to add to any of the episodes or to how I rank them, that's what the comment section is for. And if you want to see when my next video gets released, well then please subscribe. And ideally also ring the bell or do whatever else YouTube will ask of you in order to keep you notified. I also have a main channel where I talk about book-related and literature topics, a link to which you can find in the description down below, right past my social media links, which I suggest you check out, should you choose to. If that doesn't sound interesting to you, then I suggest you stay on this channel, where aside from other ranking videos, I also have various retrospectives, reviews, pitch videos, and miscellaneous other topics. I might eventually, I think I'll eventually return to Special Unit 2 and delve a little bit more into what makes it notable. But for next week, I have something a little bit different in mind. I won't spoil what. You'll just have to wait and see. For now, however, I can safely say that what I've said. And if none of the options I've presented to you sounds interesting, then I suggest you go ahead and do whatever you want the rest of your day, because it is your day after all. And yeah, that was it for me. So until next time, I have been the One Take Man.